Good afternoon to everyone. How to celebrate a life. How to feel the essence of one's presence with words, with a collective spirit. Today is about the celebration of such a life. Today is the way in which we honor Steve, the way we honor Mary, the way we honor a life beautifully lived, an individual who made his life from science and then found the beauty in capturing the beauty of our world around him. There's a thought that comes into our own words in our tradition, mi-ha'ish. These words are from Psalm 34. And the words are very clear, mi-ha'ish ha'chavetz ha'im, which means, who is the man who desires life and loves days to see good in them? Guard your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking deception. Turn away from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. I unfortunately did not have the tenure or the blessing to know Steve as so many of you have come to know him for 20 years. Or more, for some of you here. But what I can tell you is even in the interactions, even when he was battling and even when he was compromised in his own vessel, his spirit was profound. His nefesh, his soul, was high. His gifts were many. And you can feel that in who he was. And so even in those moments, those brief fleeting moments of interaction, which came far too soon to end, that I can only imagine and will certainly hear his life animated this afternoon through those who will speak and share, that in this moment, whatever our relationships were, that hopefully as we leave this sacred space, we're filled with a little more of Steve. Filled with a little more of the blessing that he gave to so many, and how he hopes and endures that we continue in our lives as we celebrate him this afternoon. Each of you should have received a booklet as you entered our sanctuary, and I'm going to invite you to turn to Psalm 121. I lift my eyes to the mountains, from where does my help come from? And the next words are, my help comes from God, maker of heaven and earth. But I'm not going to stand here in this moment and say, these are just words. In fact, I always wrestle with the psalmist in this moment. Because when a good person taken from us too soon, these words are supposed to comfort us, but I find that if perhaps we reinterpret these words, I can find the comfort. And so where does my help come from? The divine essence is found in the phone calls and in the texts and in the embrace of friends. It's found in the check-ins. It's found in the ways our neighbors reach out to us. It is found in the ways our community comes together. That to me is the S-I-N-I. And certainly for Mary and for Steve, today we hold that in this moment. The S-I-N-I moments are all of you that create the divinity in which they are surrounded in your love and support today. S-I-N-I El Harim Me'ayin Yad אשא עיני אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי. עזרי מעין אדוני עושה שמיים וארץ. עזרי מעין אדוני עושה שמיים וארץ. I invite you to join in the reading in English of Psalm 121 as we read together. I lift my eyes to the mountains. What is the source of my help? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your protector will not slumber. See, the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. God is your guardian. God is your protection at your right hand. By day the sun will not strike you, nor the moon by night. Adonai will guard you from all harm. God will guard your soul, your going and coming, now and forever.
For 20 years, this place was home for Steve. And on the front of your cards, you have Psalm 23, known the world over, often read at these moments, in times of death. But I feel that it gives us comfort the way it should. And how could it have known that those 20 years, the rest of the days of Steve's life, that he would dwell in God's house?
Mizmor David, Adonai roi lo echsar, binot asher bitzeni, al menuchot yanaleni, nafshi shovev, yancheni b'maglei tzedek, למען שמו, גם כי אלך בגצר מוות, לא אירא רע, כי אתה עמדי, שבטך ומשענתך, המה ינחמוני. תערוך לפני שולחן נגד צורריי, דשנת בשמן ראשי, כוסי רוויה, אך טוב החסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי, ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים.
Please join me. A Song of David. Eternal God, you are my shepherd. I shall not want. You make me lie down in green pastures. You lead me beside still waters. You restore my soul. You guide me in paths of righteousness for the sake of your name. Even when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. With rod and staff you comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of God forever. And we look to our sages as well for help and for comfort, for wisdom. From the book of Ecclesiastes, the wisdom literature that is attributed to the wise King Solomon, comes a beautiful text. For everything there is a season, a time for every experience under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to throw stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. Today certainly is the time to speak and to share, and we have 4 people who will help us remember Steve in the best ways. We will first hear from his niece, Robin Sears, and from Ben Shen, a very important doctoral student under Professor Stephen Gould at Oregon State University, and he has come all the way from Florida to be with us in person today. And beloved friends and congregants, Louise Windheld and Jeffrey Wall.
Good afternoon. I am Uncle Stephen's oldest niece, Robin. I want to start off by thanking you all for coming today to celebrate my uncle's beautiful life. I know we're here to honor my uncle, but I want to first honor my aunt, whose strength, love, and timeless support allowed us one more Zoom call, one more visit on the patio, and a lifetime of love with my uncle. Thank you, Aunt Mary, for giving so much of yourself. I am deeply in awe and inspired by you daily. I asked to stand here before you today to represent our family. The Gould, the Crasses, the Singers. You're going to hear this afternoon from dear, dear friends and colleagues who will share their stories of my uncle and his life. In preparing for this talk, my uncle would have appreciated my preparation. I reached out to members of our family and asked them to describe my uncle in a word. Well, if you know our family, it was more than a word. We're quite verbose. So I invite you to take a moment to sit back and listen to the words that describe my dear Uncle Steve. My uncle was bright, caring, sensitive, enthusiastic, intellectually curious, and warm. He was knowledgeable, passionate, and patient. These 3 words consistently came up in the emails I received. Knowledgeable, passionate, and patient. My uncle embodied these 3 words in everything he did, as a professor in the lab with his students, as a photographer in the field, or just bending down in front of his collection of rocks and gems and pointing out each peculiarity to my then 10-year-old, now 17-year-old bonus son. Knowledge, passion, and patience came out in each photo that he painstakingly spent time to capture and craft each perfect moment. Knowledge, passion, and patience came out in how he asked poignant questions and chose each word he spoke so deliberately when deep in conversation. My uncle was a man of words. He was another father to me in many ways, and I turned to him for advice and guidance, for his knowledge, his passion, and his patience. Our visits, while not always frequent, were memorable and impactful. There was always some deep conversation about life and the world, and he challenged me to ask hard and provoking questions, to think about the words that I used, and to listen more. My uncle was punny, Another theme that came out was his killer wit, a mixed appreciation for his ability to turn any word into a pun. My cousin Daniel told one of my favorites, which I must share. One night, Dan was having dinner with my Uncle Steve and Aunt Mary and his parents. And my Aunt Deb asked Uncle Steve and Aunt Mary which port they might enjoy after dinner, to which my uncle replied without missing a beat, "Any port in a storm." I'd like to believe that my Uncle Steve, Uncle John, my dad, and my grandpa are sitting around toasting right now to a life well lived, and my Uncle John and Dad are groaning over one of my uncle's puns. As you may or may not know, my uncle was a policer of uptalk. Uptalk? I can barely even say it in a talk today. There was a time in my life when he would call, and I swear it was just to catch me in it. He emphasized over and over the importance of sounding confident in my words. He would ask how things were going, and I would say, "Things are great. I'm headed to the movies with my friends." And he would say, "Are you sure?" And I would reply, "Yes, I'm sure, Uncle Steve." And he would say, "Well, you didn't sound it." So I hope in my words today, I sound very confident and very sure. "Oh, Robin, he was a great bloke who I could have fun with." And that was my worst Aussie accent on behalf of my bonus mom coming from Australia. A perfectionist, a giver, a doer, a believer, a Jew. My uncle and I shared a deep love for our Jewish heritage and tradition and deep dimples. It is that bond that kept us connected over our lives, even living far apart. Kind eyes, an infectious smile, and smooth moves, which my aunt certainly appreciated. The last year brought another set of words: a fighter, a warrior, a survivor. My uncle's legacy lives on in these words, in each of our hearts, and in the photos that hang on our walls. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Ben Shen. I'm a chemistry professor at the Scripps Research Institute. I direct the Natural Product Discovery Center at Scripps Research on the Florida campus. I come here today to tell you Steve was the best mentor I could ever ask for. He has profoundly impacted my career and my life. Steve was once asked what his greatest accomplishment was. He answered, "There are two. In addition to being the accomplished photographer, most of you know him as here in San Diego since 2003. Steve trained, mentored a generation of young scientists over the 23 years as a chemistry professor. Steve not only taught his students technical skills, scientific knowledge. He also instilled in his students a philosophy of science and of life. I'm one of his lucky beneficiaries of Steve's mentoring. Through a fortuitous process in the summer of 1984, Steve accepted me, directly from China, into his lab at Oregon State University for graduate studies. In those early days, with so few exchanges between the US and China, Steve took a chance on me, for which I'm forever grateful. It took me nearly 2 years to come to Corvallis, Oregon. I met Steve the first time on March the 10th, 1986. Since I arrived in the middle of the semester, I didn't get any chance to register for any classes. To help ease my anxiety, Steve gave me weekly individual lessons instead, rapidly transitioning me into the lab and onto my thesis research. These one-on-one sessions with Steve was extremely meaningful, made me feel at home, gave me the confidence to be confident aim high and never settles. They were just the start of a very special 4.5 years in the Gould's lab, for which I enjoyed every moment. With Steve's encouragement, I took another leap of faith and joined a molecular biology and a genetics lab for my postdoctoral training in 1991. That was right after Steve returned from his sabbatical in UK and started to shift his research towards more a genetic, a biochemical approach to natural products, eventually leading to his position as the executive director of natural product drug discovery at Merck in 1997. It happened to be visiting Steve in the summer of 1996, right before Steve accepted his Merck position, and I witnessed how excited Steve was to embark on this new charter of his life, to change the paradigm of natural product drug discovery at Big Pharma. I kept close contact with Steve during his tenure at Merck. Years later, I realized these events profoundly shaped my career choice. After over 2 decades of academic research on natural product chemistry, I inherited Big Pharma's legacy microbial strain collection in 2018, launched the natural product drug discovery program at Scripps Research. The last time we met in January 2020, I shared with Steve how excited I was about this new research initiative. Steve looked at me, told me, I'm really glad the natural product drug discovery will continue. What you're doing is what I started when I took over at Merck in 1997. If we had been allowed to continue, we would have been doing exactly down the road you are traveling right now. Nothing beats the seal of approval of your beloved mentor. In addition to being a great scientist, Steve is a great life coach. A long walk Steve and I took on the Delmar Beach in 2008 was particularly meaningful when I was struggling with my overseas father's deteriorating health. Steve shared with me his experience in the final few months of his father's life, told me that what matters most is knowing your limitations, cherishing every moment of the life together. While nothing can prepare a son for the loss of his father, Steve's words helped me emerging strong, treasure the final minutes at my father's bedside. I also remember the first time Steve met my 2 daughters, 5 and 8 then, in Hawaii in 2000. Kneeling on the floor with a goofing grandpa look, Steve winked his eye, gently patted on their shoulders, and said, "Don't grow too fast. Don't grow too fast. Ignore what your father tells you to do. Just be happy." Wise words from a wise man indeed. Steve, wherever you are, my girl has grew up now, but they are still young at heart. And most importantly, they are very happy. Steve will be dearly missed for his caring, loving personality, unparalleled intellect, zest for life, passion in mentoring young scientists. His advice and guidance will continue to carry me through the joy and the challenge work and life have to offer. Thank you.
My name is Louise Windheld, and this is an honor that humbles me. When Steve asked me if I'd accept his request to give one of the eulogies at his memorial service, he also reminded me that my late husband Jay and I were the people he and Mary have known the longest in San Diego. I remember meeting Steve and Mary one summer Saturday morning in 2002 at the Beth Israel lay-led Minyan service. Jay and I were sitting in the back row so we'd be able to greet folks coming in. When Steve and Mary, who were synagogue shopping, walked in, we greeted them and beckoned them to come join us. They refused at first, saying they weren't dressed appropriately. They were wearing cutoffs. But we assured them that their clothes didn't matter, and that was the beginning of a good friendship. When Steve's father died several months or so later, Jay and I went up to LA for his funeral, and that touched Steve a lot. No one else from San Diego was there. Soon, Steve and Mary joined our Havurah and were active members who lent their experiences and expertise in many of our discussions. Years later, when my husband died, I sat next to Steve and Mary during the Rosh Hashanah service. And Steve gripped my hand. When we got to the part of the service which states, "On Rosh Hashanah it is written, and on Yom Kippur it is sealed, who shall live and who shall die." And now I hope to hold Mary's hand next Rosh Hashanah when we all recite that prayer. Steve was also active in our synagogue caring committee, making calls at various holiday times to make sure those housebound were not left out. I will always remember Passover Seders at their home, filled with great food, Mary's chicken soup and matzah balls, as well as chopped liver and roasted chicken. And lots of laughter and music, Mary on drums and Ron Reff on guitar. But we also had interesting discussions as Steve wove into the service contemporary issues that reflected what some passages in the Haggadah might mean today. My relationship with Steve and Mary wasn't only based in synagogue. They taught my partner Dave and me how to play Rummy Cube, and we loved it immediately. Soon Dave and I tweaked our own version, which we find just as challenging and less frustrating. But Steve didn't like it and never really accepted it. So whenever the two couples got together to play the game, we alternated versions to keep each of us happy. Now whenever I get into a tough position during the game and can't figure out a move, I think, what would Steve do? And invariably, I'm then able to figure out a solution. Dave and I learned from them, and they learned from us. Dave and I have delivered Meals on Wheels for years and told Mary and Steve about it, and then they delivered meals for quite a while. We shared lots of sometimes funny, sometimes sad stories about our clients. Travel stories abounded. At first, we two couples shared equally interesting stories, but soon they beat us with their underwater photography from around the world and on-land videos and stills from Antarctica. But was that really Steve and Mary all bundled up in cold protective gear? We can only take their word for it. Steve, I learned a lot from you, including how to look intelligently at a photograph, including the couple that we bought from you and that hang in our home. And in these last horrible months, we learned about the power of internal fortitude and the power of good friendship. I miss you. We all miss you. Shalom, my friend.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming to honor Steve's life. You've heard loving words from his niece, Robin. I'm glad I didn't follow you, Robin, directly. You've heard from his mentee, Ben. It's an honor to any advisor for a former student to come and honor him in the way that you did. You've heard from a close friend, Louise, and so you have some idea of the humanity that Steve held, and indeed I think that's the reason that you're all here, because he attracted us to him for that reason. I came to know Steve and Mary rather more recently in 2009 at a chance meeting at a friend's house where they showed some of their spectacular pictures of their adventures around the world. My wife Barbara and I then the next day went to their home to view more of these glorious pictures, images beyond pictures. And we ended up buying so many of them, of the beach gems, that in one day we became the world's largest holder of Steve Gould beach gems. That day that we spent with them marked the beginning of what would become my closest friendship of the past 12 years. When he asked me to give this eulogy, like Louise, I of course said yes, it would be an honor and a privilege. But I wondered, why did he ask me? Was it because we share so many similarities? Him having spent his most formative years in LA, me having grown up there? Was it because we were both UCLA alums? Was it because we were both scientists? Was it because we both went to the East Coast to go to graduate school and shared some of our stories of that time there? Or was it just because we could and did speak about everything? As you've heard from Robin, he had a fathomless, bottomless pit of curiosity, of knowledge, of wisdom. We talked about politics. I won't tell you. Now, we better not go there. Photography, about loving relationships, about the importance of family. I think, though, when he asked me to give this eulogy, he knew that I would intuitively understand that the objective should not be to focus on him, but rather to focus on those of us who are now left to go on without him. How do we do that? Mary, his family, all of us as friends. So I wrote this eulogy not only to honor Steve and his memory, but also to relay the 2 rules that he left me with that were his way of guiding all of us into a world in which he would no longer be physically present. The first rule deals with how we will continue to think about a prayer that has always been so meaningful, if not ominous, that we say at the High Holy Days. Not the one that Louise brought up, although I had thought about that one as well, and I think that that's the reason why Mary and Steve missed this year's High Holy Day services. We talked to them about that, and we had attended every High Holy Day with you for the last 12 years. Rather, it's the prayer that you may recall starts with, birth is a beginning, and death is a destination, and life is a journey. So, Steve's rule number 1. His rule number 1 has to do with taking this journey through life in a way that will increase the meaning of our lives and enrich the journeys of our fellow travelers. Rule number 1. In typical Steve Gould fashion, take all your vacation days and use them well. Steve's journey through half his life was enhanced in meaning and significance by Mary, devoted wife, tireless supporter, ever-present nurturer, and fellow adventurer. Indeed, even in the first afternoon we spent with Steve and Mary, rule number 1 was in full play. When Steve and Mary both encouraged Barbara and me to get out of our comfort zones and tour the Galapagos in a small boat rather than going in a large ship. Well, I have to tell you, Mary, and you know it, that trip changed our lives. It created memories for me and Barbara, Matthew, and Allison that we'll never forget. I think it's one of the things that bonded Matthew to you and to Steve and invited you to come to their wedding in Tahoe, which you did and at which you danced for the last time with Steve. And you taught all of us how to do Israeli square dancing. So, Mary and Steve, you've taught us to use our vacation time wisely. And as you know, and as you've heard and as you've seen, Steve was a superb photographer who had an uncanny ability to capture the essence of a place, cloud, landscape, and find unexpected beauty in even the most unmundane of objects. Looking at Steve's glorious images has left me with a deeper understanding of the meaning of rule number 1. Steve's images are unique because of the way he captured light to reflect the transience and hidden beauty in nature. One example is beach gems, of which I've already spoken. Here he captured in a totally unique way the brilliance of what most people regard as ordinary stones on the shore. Steve recognized that when the sun was in the perfect spot, the interference patterns created by its rays permeating the water would produce a brilliant display of orange, green, blue, and violet at the rock's surface. But the colors were short-lived, disappearing with the receding wave, restoring the rock to its modest origins. So you had to be there in that moment. And Steve was, and he captured it. His remarkable images reflect his character, a person keenly aware of the importance of time. I think this came from his dad's death. And he knew that he had that same genetic time bomb within him. And recognizing the hidden beauty surrounding us, discovering how rocks can be turned into beach gems requires thoughtfulness, technical knowledge, and most of all, the intention to capture that unique and fleeting moment in a way that can bring enjoyment and a higher level of awareness and connection to others. When I look at Steve's beach gems, I think that what he would really want us to do is to recognize that gem-like quality in those closest to us and to cherish them during that fleeting moment when we are blessed to share their acquaintance. This brings me to rule number 2. Steve said, act in an honorable way, give back, practice tzedakah, practice tikkun olam, exercise tzedakah. I see Steve's rule number 2 being inspired by his Judaism, of which you've heard a bit. He and Mary went to Minyan every Saturday. They were part of the Havarah that Louise talked about. He went to temple regularly, and his devotion to the temple and its many meritorious causes was recognized by his being honored to chant from the Torah at High Holy Day services, which he and Mary, I know, took very seriously. Steve told me that he felt that Reform Judaism was perfect for him due to its tolerance of his unorthodox practices. He took great delight, for example, in going to his favorite deli in Brookline, Massachusetts at Passover, to which he would bring matzah and then order pork spare ribs. He said he never could understand kashrut. Steve and Mary both live rule number 2. Among other important contributions that you've already heard about, they both gave generously, volunteered their time to those in need, gave to charity, delivered food through Meals on Wheels, and in his various careers, not just one, but many, Steve was consistently a terrific mentor. And being a scientist myself, I regard mentoring as the highest responsibility of a professor, more than any discovery that you may make. Even more importance than the research that one pursues or the grants one obtains. Rather, mentoring represents this generosity of spirit, of intellect, experience, and the desire to inspire and encourage the next generation, as you've heard, and he's done that. The impact of his mentoring in the students and postdocs who he's trained, in fact, create Steve's legacy and will go on forever. Now, one of the things that Steve, Mary, Barbara, and I enjoyed doing together was going to the movies. And we'd have a lovely dinner, and then we would discuss what we had seen, and Mary would always go to IMDb, and she would tell us so deeply what we should have already seen in the movie. Well, Mary, last night, Barbara chose a movie for us to watch, and it was a documentary called The Dawn Wall. And The Dawn Wall is a film about two rock climbers, Tommy Caldwell and Kevin Jorgensen, who set out to make the most difficult rock climb in the world, scaling the Dawn Wall of El Capitan, a sheer face of smooth granite that rises 3,000 feet straight up from the valley floor. This climb could not have been attempted alone. It required a close and trusting partnership, grit, determination, perseverance, and complete trust in the other person. Mary, you helped Steve climb his Dawn Wall over the past year and more. Here the goal was extra time to love and cherish each other, extra time to be with friends, extra time to follow rules 1 and 2. Your extraordinary and tireless care, love, devotion, and empathy helped Steve to live as long as he did through so many harrowing ups and downs over the past several years. You enabled him to enjoy his 75th birthday, which even over Zoom attracted 100 people from all over the world because they care so much. They cared so much about him and about you. Through rules 1 and 2, you have made indelible impressions on many, many people, and without you, Steve would not have been able to have what he talked about all year long: a rare steak at Ruth's Chris. We were fortunate to join with you in that dinner on the glorious outdoor patio as the sun set on a life well lived and deeply loved. I want to make one final comment. The last time I saw Steve was on Wednesday, November 10th, just before you arrived. I asked him to give me a sign that I would recognize that he would still be with us after he passed. And he just smiled at me, as if I would know it when I saw it. And when I got home, I looked at his beach gems. Not hard to do because they're on every wall of our house. But there in each rock, I noticed a strange pattern. On closer inspection, I realized it was Steve's reflection. I regard this as Steve's clever way of showing us that he is still and will always be part of our world, making sure we are always following rules 1 and rules 2. I love Steve dearly. I'll always love him. I now understand that he has made it to the top and beyond the Dawn Wall. His memory will be a blessing for eternity.
There is no more beautiful way than to honor a beloved uncle, a beloved mentor, an extraordinary and beloved friend than what you have done today for Mary and for all of us. And I want to thank as well Rabbi Ralph Dallin for his help in the many past months. I like to think of Steve's dedication to our community to Mary, to chanting Torah and Haftarah, or whatever he was called upon to do with a full heart. He became, for me, an Ish Tzaddik B'dorotav, a righteous man in his generation. 20 years of relationship, it's not enough. No amount of time would have been enough for us and for Steve. And we will remember him every day, every Shabbat, every doctoral thesis, every time we see a photograph or a beautiful scene in nature. Zichrono livracha, may his memory always be for blessing. The El Mali-Raham prayer that you can find in the middle of your cards is a prayer for Steve's soul. And if you're able, please rise as we honor him.
El Mali-Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Amitzei Menucha Nichona, Tachat Kanfei Hashchina, Im Kedoshim Utorim, Kezoar Akia, Mazirim, Ad Nishmat, Shalom ben Ruven Verachel, Shalach Leolamo, Begoin Eden Menuchato, Anabal Harachamim, Yastireu Beseter Kanafav Leolamim, Bitzor Achayim Et Nishmato, Adonai Hu Nachalato, V'yanuch B'shalom Al Mishkavo, V'nomar Amen.
As we remain standing, we turn in our pamphlets to the words of Kadisha Tom, the Mourner's Kaddish. These words are reflective of mentors and teachers. They're the words that the rabbis initially honored for those teachers in their lives. Those teachers ultimately became family, the immediate family members. And then in our progressive Jewish community, it became a collective understanding of sharing in the grief and sharing in the mourning and in the honor with our voices and our hearts as well. So however you may practice and however you may honor Steve, if you are able, we share these words of Kadisha Tom, not in words that say anything about death, but in words that remind us of Oseh Shalom B'Mamav, the words that remind us, may God bring to ourselves, our communities, and the greater world a bit of wholeness, a bit of peace. And so we say together, Yitzgadal v'yitzgadash merabah, be'alma divrach hirutei v'amlich malchutei, v'chaye echon v'yom echon, uv'chaye l'chol Beit Israel, ba'gala v'zman kariv v'imru amen, Yehe Shmei Rabba Mevorach Leolam Olamei Almayam, Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal Shmei the Kudusha B'richu, La'ela mikol berchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, damiran be'ama v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabam min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mumav, uyaseh shalom. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. We say zichrono livracha. May Steve's essence, may his passion, may his goodness, his mentorship, may his soul ever be for blessing as we say amen. We conclude this afternoon with the words Oseh shalom b'mumav, the words that do remind us and ask of God to bring peace upon us as we join together. Oseh shalom b'mumav, uyaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru amen. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael. We invite you to join us outside in our courtyard to join for a luncheon in honor of Steve. Thank you so much for joining us.